When we base our reflections on traditions, we run the risk of delving into the land of pure stereotype and making assumptions about people based on their traditions. Or we assume that, in today's case, all Australians observe Christmas in exactly the same way. And we know from our own experience that this will not be true. What we read online about Christmas in Canada, for example, may reflect some of our actual experience, or hardly at all. And grouping New Zealand in with Australia together is probably much like talking about Canada and the United States as if they were one. And those of us who live in Canada might have a few things to say about that. And yet we also know that many of our cultural and Christmas traditions are very similar to those just a little south of us. And traditions tend to reflect at least a glimpse of some cultural truths, even if the glimpse is historical and incomplete. So those who have actually been to Australia might have a sense of whether what we say today feels like a fair representation of life down under. I am confident that most Australians would tell us we have totally missed the mark in several key ways. Too bad our budget doesn't allow us to just invite international guests. But with your indulgence, I'm going to forge ahead into that land of tradition and broad generalization, hoping that our reflections may offer some food for thought in our own context and in our own celebrations. Culturally, because our British Commonwealth history, we share quite a bit in common with Australia, and perhaps New Zealand even more. So the biggest difference between our Christmas celebrations and theirs is, frankly, it's summertime. It's not winter, so there is no dreaming of a white Christmas. It is ridiculous to sing In the Bleak Midwinter, or See Amidst the Winter Snow, and even sillier to wear a Christmas sweater, ugly or not. And yet, if you were to go into an Australian store at this time of year, you might well hear Deck the Halls over the loudspeaker system, ringing out heedless of the wind and weather. That's what happens when your colonial tradition comes from a place with winter weather. The things you inherit may not exactly fit, but you find a way to pull them together. So what we find in Australia and New Zealand at Christmas is a blend of things that may appear to be full of contradiction. And yet there somehow seems to be a willingness to live with and even embrace that contradiction. Seems to be that one of the things that an Australian Christmas does pretty well is bring together things that don't seem to go together at all. The North Pole Santa Claus is on a surfboard. There are evergreen Christmas trees decorated in the midst of flowering bushes. So when I went looking for Australian Christmas carols, I found a whole bunch of different things, some of which we're hearing and singing today. But I kept coming across one by Tim Minchin called White Wine in the Sun. And many polls in Australia list it as the favorite modern Christmas song in Australia. It starts off with, I really like Christmas. It's sentimental, I know, but I just really like it. But then the singer diverts into a socio-political commentary about the holiday. So imagine these next words, yes, set to music. And yes, I have all of the usual objections to consumerism, the commercialization of an ancient religion, to the westernization of a dead Palestinian press-ganged into selling PlayStations and beer, but I still really like it. I quite like the songs. This favorite song got me wondering about the ways that we in North America have a more difficult time holding the tension and the contradictions. Because we too now have a holiday that is profoundly secular as well as sacred. And we aren't always quite sure how to navigate that. So some of us try to draw hard lines in our language. We will only say happy holidays and have winter concerts So we won't reference any religious connections to the season and not exclude any of those who aren't observing that. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we find the people who take offense at being wished happy holidays, as if someone is also then wishing them harm. And some of us militantly refer to a war on Christmas and get offended by a Starbucks holiday cup. You might remember the internet evangelist who in 2015, clad in a Jesus t-shirt, clutching a handgun, railed against the coffee chain for trying to take Christmas and Christ off their cups, and told people that they needed to prank Starbucks by telling baristas their name was Merry Christmas, so they'd have to write it on the cup and then yell it out when the drink was ready. I am interested that it is the secular Australian singer who can bring all of the contradictions together, who's able to name them and see them for what they are and figure out how to live with that. On the other hand, we, in North America, have this habit of sort of picking all the things we like and then not seeing in them any contradiction at all and just saying, this is what Christmas is about. I remember talking recently with someone, for example, about the complicated ethics of sending Christmas gifts in the name of Christ to developing and low-income nations. And a response to this concern by someone clearly in favor of sending our stuff was to say it was really important because they don't even have malls in some of these countries, and how can they therefore ever celebrate Christmas? It seems to me it's often we North American Christians who have difficulty remembering the religious point of the celebration. We don't see the contradictions, so we just pretend there aren't any. In Isaiah's vision of God's dream for the world, there is a vision of bringing together the contradictions, bringing together the differences, not in a way that erases them, but allows them to live together in peace. The crocodile and the wallaby will not become some new merged animal, but will eat together. Or as we might read in versions we're more used to, the wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain. Sort of reminds me of a culture in Australia that has been coined mateship, where everyone belongs. There isn't as much hierarchy of importance. So don't try and be too famous to talk to someone on the street, because no one is too important or not important enough to stop and have a chat with, whether they're your boss or a stranger. Don't sit in the backseat of a taxi if you're on your own. And I think there may be something there to learn from, particularly at Christmas, when it is quite easy for us to get caught up in judgments about how to celebrate correctly, and whether you have the right gift, or any of those things that heighten the stress of Christmas preparations here where we live. When it somehow seems important to us to get things just right. Maybe the anxiety level here is higher at Christmas because it's cold. When it's gray and dark, we kind of hunker down, we retreat, we let our fears eat away at us. Christmas doesn't seem to have that flavor in Australia or New Zealand, and maybe because it's summer. And maybe because so much of Christmas happens outside, where the environment is freer and wilder and less under our control, so why try? And maybe it's because of that more laid-back culture that Australia is famous for, which I'm sure does not mean there isn't stress or anxiety or workaholism in Australia, but it's not part of the tradition just yet. And maybe there's something to learn from there too. According to Isaiah, God offers us a promise that we Christians celebrate at Christmas, a promise that something new is coming to change the world as we know it. The rules of the world would be turned upside down. And at Christmas, we celebrate that in the birth of Jesus. But the Messiah doesn't come in the way we expect. Change comes slowly like a green shoot sprouting in the stump of an old tree. This promise invites us to trust that God is at work like slow growth, like trusting the presence of stars even when we can't see them. To trust that our manufactured traditions are not required to bring about God's promise, nor will any of our contradictions or failed plans deter what God is about. So, snow or no snow, Christmas comes. Turkey dinner or picnic lunch, Christmas comes. Cozy fireplace or sandy beach, Christmas comes. The love of God is born among us. Thanks be to God. Amen.